Only player that I could see that's truly got a special whistle is Asia Wilson. 13 foul shots. She had 13 foul attempts. Look at the rest of the team. I mean,
The league finally did it. They were backed into a corner with nowhere left to run, the entire world watching, and they finally lowered the boom. Aya Wilson has been suspended. Let that sink in for a moment. This isn't just a fine for a hard foul. This isn't a slap on the wrist. This is the WNBA, after years of protecting their golden goose, being forced to publicly admit that their two-time MVP, the face of the league, engaged in a play so egregious, so far beyond the spirit of the game, that they had no choice but to sit her down. This wasn't a basketball play, it was a desperate, ugly act of frustration that the world saw for what it was, a brutal assault on an opponent who was simply outplaying her. The special whistle, the endless parade to the free throw line, the carefully crafted narrative of dominance, it all came crashing down in one single moment of madness. And the most beautiful part? It happened on a night where her crumbling empire was exposed for the entire world to see. Because this suspension is just the headline. The real story is the absolute humiliation that preceded it, a beatdown of such historic proportions that it completely rewrote the power dynamics of the entire league. For 16 straight games, for 5 long years, the Indiana Fever were the Las Vegas Aces' punching bag. It was a pre-written script every time they met. The Aces, with their super team roster and their league-protected superstar, would inevitably walk away with a win, while the Fever were left to lick their wounds and hear about their own irrelevance. But on this night, something was different. The script was torn to shreds, set on fire, and thrown into the garbage. The Fever didn't just win. They dismembered the Las Vegas Aces. They walked into the champion's house and delivered a 30-point demolition that felt less like a basketball game and more like a public shaming. The final score was 81-54, a margin so vast it looks like a typo. This wasn't just a loss for Vegas, it was a complete system failure, an ego death played out in front of thousands. Every narrative the league had pushed about the Aces' invincibility evaporated over 48 minutes of pure, unadulterated dominance by Indiana. Now, here's where the story goes from a massive upset to a legendary takedown. The Fever did all of this historic, curse-breaking 16-game losing streak, snapping obliteration without Caitlin Clark on the floor. Think about that. The most hyped rookie in the history of the sport, the player critics claimed was the only reason the Fever were even relevant, was on the sidelines. And her team, her resilient, tough-as-nails team, didn't just survive, they thrived. They proved to the entire world that they are not a one-woman show. They are a legitimate force, a deep, talented roster that plays with a collective fire that the so-called champions simply could not handle. This victory wasn't just about one game, it was a statement. It was a message to every other team in the WNBA that the Indiana Fever are here, and they are for real. While the Aces were left stuttering and confused, looking for the league-mandated help that never came, the Fever were playing with a chemistry and a ferocity that was breathtaking to watch. They moved the ball with purpose, they defended with a rabid intensity, and they exposed the Aces not as a dynasty, but as a team that has grown soft and entitled, a team that expects victory to be handed to them. And that entitlement, that shock of facing real adversity is what led to the moment that will now live in infamy. As the game slipped away, as the Fever's lead ballooned from comfortable to embarrassing, Aya Wilson's composure shattered. The MVP facade cracked, and underneath was a player who couldn't cope with being on the losing end of a beatdown. She wasn't getting her usual chorus of whistles. Her teammates were invisible. The Fever were running them out of their own building. So she did what frustrated players do. She abandoned basketball and chose violence. Lexie Hull, a player known for her hustle, her grit, and her commitment to doing things the right way, was establishing position for a rebound. She had Wilson boxed out, a perfect textbook play that coaches teach from day one. It was a simple, fundamental act of basketball. But Wilson, seeing the play unfold, seeing herself being neutralized, simply lost her mind. She didn't fight for position. She didn't try to outmaneuver Hull. Instead, she lunged forward, reached completely over the top, and wrapped her arm around Lexie Hull's head and neck, yanking her backwards. It was a move you'd see in a wrestling ring, not on a basketball court. It was dangerous, it was reckless, and it was the clearest sign that the pressure had finally broken her. She wasn't trying to get the ball, she was trying to send a message through sheer, undisciplined physicality. And in doing so, she exposed her own character. While her team was failing, instead of elevating her play, she chose to drag an opponent down with her, literally. This was the act of a player who has forgotten how to compete on a level playing field, a player so used to being protected that she no longer knows what to do when the game gets tough. The most damning moments in sports aren't the mistakes, they're the moments of deliberate injustice when the rules that are supposed to apply to everyone are suddenly suspended for one protected individual. What happened after Wilson wrenched Lexie Hull to the floor was one of those moments. The whistle blew, and for a split second, everyone assumed the obvious, a flagrant foul on Aya Wilson. But then the unthinkable happened. The referees, after a brief huddle where one can only imagine they were coordinating their story, signaled a jump ball. A jump ball, let that absurdity wash over you. A player is put into what looks like a submission hold from behind, a play with zero attempt to get the basketball, and the official ruling is that it's a moment of simultaneous possession. It was a decision so profoundly corrupt, so divorced from the reality that millions had just witnessed, that it ceased to be a simple blown call. It was a confession. It was the referees openly admitting that they operate under a different set of rules for Aya Wilson. They were no longer officiating a basketball game, they were managing a narrative, and their primary job was to protect the league's chosen protagonist at all costs, even if it meant turning the game into a farce. This is the infamous A'ja Wilson whistle that fans, players, and even some commentators have been whispering about for years. It's the unwritten rule in the WNBA that any contact against Wilson is a foul, while any contact initiated by her is simply aggressive play. The box score from this game wasn't just evidence of this phenomenon, it was the smoking gun. On a night where her team was getting physically dominated, Aya Wilson shot 13 free throws. 13. Now let's ask the obvious question, how many free throws did the rest of the Aces starting lineup attempt? The answer is a pathetic, almost comical 4, combined. Are we to believe that in a 30-point blowout, only one player on the losing team was ever getting fouled? Meanwhile, Aaliyah Boston, the anchor of the Indiana Fever, a player who lives in the paint and endures a full-scale assault on her body every single night, got to the line a grand total of 2 times. The disparity isn't just suspicious, it's statistically impossible in a fairly officiated game. It's a manufactured reality, a form of point laundering where the league ensures its marquee player gets her numbers, regardless of her actual performance. Her MVP awards, her scoring titles, they all deserve an asterisk because they've been built on a foundation of preferential treatment that no other player in the league enjoys. And that is precisely why Indiana's head coach, Stephanie White, finally lost her mind. As a coach, you accept mistakes. You accept the human element of officiating. What you cannot accept is systemic, blatant bias that puts your player's safety at risk. She watched Wilson assault Lexie Hull. She saw the referees look the other way and invent a jump ball out of thin air. And she did what any coach with a shred of integrity would do. She fought for her player. She erupted on the sideline, not in a petty fit of rage, but in a righteous fury against a system that was so clearly and unapologetically rigged. And what was her reward for demanding fairness? A swift, technical foul. The same referees who were apparently blind to a player being choked on the court suddenly developed eagle eyes for a coach raising her voice on the sideline. The message from the league was crystal clear: you will sit down, you will be quiet, and you will accept the narrative we are selling. The player who commits the dangerous act gets a jump ball in her favor, but the coach who dares to call it out gets punished. It's a backwards, upside-down version of justice that has come to define the modern WNBA, and it's precisely why fans are losing faith. Stephanie White became a hero in that moment, not just to her players, but to every fan who is sick and tired of watching a sport where the outcome feels predetermined by the whistles. The league and its officials desperately hoped this would all just blow over. They wanted the narrative to be about the Fever's great win, not their own officiating malpractice. But they severely underestimated the power of the fans. In the age of social media, you can't hide anymore. The clip of Wilson's foul on Hull went viral within minutes, a digital firestorm of outrage that the WNBA couldn't possibly contain. Fans were breaking down the video, creating side-by-side comparisons with actual wrestling moves, and flooding the league's social media accounts with demands for accountability. This wasn't just a few disgruntled Fever supporters, it was a league-wide uprising of fans who were fed up. They saw the injustice in plain sight and refused to be gaslit by a jump ball call. They created memes, they tagged sports journalists, they forced the conversation. This public pressure, this relentless, fan-driven demand for truth is the only reason this story didn't die on the court. The league wasn't shamed into action by their conscience, they were shamed into action by their customers. They had to suspend Wilson, not because it was the right thing to do, but because the fans had made it impossible for them not to. It was a stunning display of collective power, proving that even the most protected superstar is no match for a million angry voices with video evidence. So the league finally caved. Faced with a mountain of undeniable video evidence and a digital tsunami of fan outrage, they announced Aya Wilson's suspension. And in that moment, everything changed. This was more than just a punishment, it was a paradigm shift. For the first time, the league was forced to acknowledge that its empress had no clothes. The shield of invincibility that had surrounded her for years was shattered. This one decision validated every fan who ever screamed at their TV about a phantom foul call. It vindicated every opponent who had to play through the frustration of a rigged game. And it was a monumental victory for Stephanie White, who was punished for simply telling the truth. The suspension confirms that what happened on that court was not just a hard foul or a basketball play gone wrong. It was, as the fans correctly identified, an act that had no place in the sport, an act born of desperation and a complete loss of professional composure. The league can no longer hide behind the excuse of superstar calls. They were forced to call this what it was, an unsportsmanlike attack that warranted a player being removed from the court. This is indeed huge because it sets a new precedent. The question is no longer if the Aya Wilson whistle exists. The question is now what the league is going to do about the officials who have been blowing it for her all these years. Now let's talk about the myth of her dominant 29-point performance in that game, because it might be the most fraudulent stat line of the entire season. Her loyalists will point to that number as proof that she was the only one who showed up for her team. But let's break it down, shall we? Of those 29 points, a staggering 11 of them came from the free throw line. She was gifted 13 attempts, making 11. That means nearly 40% of her entire offensive output was handed to her by the referees, not earned through skill. While her teammates were struggling to get a single call, Wilson was living at the charity stripe, a safe haven provided by the officials whenever the Fever's defense got too suffocating. Take away that special whistle and her performance looks completely pedestrian. She wasn't a lone warrior fighting against the tide, she was the beneficiary of a corrupt system that was still desperately trying to keep her team in a game they had no business being in. Her points were empty, a hollow statistic that did nothing to stop the bleeding as her team was systematically dismantled around her. It was a perfect microcosm of her career, a flashy point total that masks the reality of the preferential treatment she receives. And what about the rest of her super team? This game exposed the dirty little secret of the Las Vegas Aces. Their dynasty is a fraud. It's built on a faulty foundation that completely collapses the moment they face a team that isn't intimidated by their reputation or the officials in their pocket. Chelsea Gray, an Olympic gold medalist and supposedly one of the best point guards on the planet, finished the game with 2 points. 2. She was a complete non-factor, rendered useless by the Fever's relentless defensive pressure. As a team, the Aces shot a miserable 26% from the field. They were out-rebounded, out-hustled, and thoroughly out-coached. They were beaten in the paint 38-20, proving that for all their star power, they couldn't handle Indiana's physicality. They turned the ball over 17 times, looking sloppy and unprepared. This wasn't a team having an off night, this was a team being exposed. They have become so accustomed to the game being officiated on their terms, so used to Aya Wilson's free throw parade bailing them out, that they have forgotten how to win a rock fight. They have no plan B. When the shots aren't falling and the whistles aren't blowing, they don't dig deeper, they panic, they get frustrated, and they resort to cheap shots, just as their leader did. This loss wasn't just a mark in the L column, it was an indictment of their entire championship culture. It revealed them to be frontrunners who can only play when the game is easy. The second it gets hard, the second a team punches them in the mouth, they fold. And on this night, the Indiana Fever delivered a knockout blow that the Aces and the league will be feeling for a very, very long time.